As a middle school student, I can remember flipping through a history textbook, a book that talked about the resilience of a Genoese explorer braving months on a harsh sea until he reached land. The name? Christopher Columbus, America's first great hero. Now, could anyone who's ever heard of Columbus please raise your hands? Okay, thank you. So, follow-up question. What specific group of people did Columbus find when he came to this part of the world? And you can call out if you have an idea. Yeah, Columbus found the Taínos. Usually when I pose this question, everyone knows the name of the man who came from Europe. But no one knows the name of the people who were here before, even though they numbered in millions. Why don't we know their name? Historical silencing. There was no new discovery. The Americas had been explored tens of thousands of years before. But acknowledging the Siberians, the Afro-Phoenicians, the West Africans, just to give some examples, is few and far between when it comes to textbooks. Why? History is sculpted. It rests at the hands of the interpreter when textbooks fail to mention those who preceded, when they fail to mention the exploitation of native peoples in all its ugly glory, when they hail European accomplishments as the only ones that matter, they fail us. They create a false narrative, embedding myth into their stories, erasing harsh realities, and packaging all that as truth. In America's false narrative, to minimize white brutality against her non-white population and then suppress their voices. But when this historical sciencing goes beyond the fallibility of a middle school to high school textbook, when it becomes the narrative of a country, that is when it becomes most dangerous. So when the word slavery comes up, it's a hard pill to swallow. Our Columbus, our great hero, played a role in sending the first slaves across the Atlantic, catapulting a domino effect. The slave trade targeted and destroyed whole indigenous populations, kidnapped and dehumanized indigenous peoples and Africans, but this is not our narrative. Our narrative is a holiday in Columbus's name and forgetting of a whole nation of people who were here before. Now, I have to admit I lied when I said there was no new discovery. 1492 marked a year of discovery. The transatlantic slave trade and selling indigenous peoples and Africans set into motion the mentality of white and black. 1492 is the year white was discovered. The change was gradual, but eventually hereditary enslavement based upon color became defining. The US was the birthplace of race-based slavery. There's a dramatic transformation from an enslavement of a group of people to an enslavement of a group of people based on their race. Ineptitude was based purely on a skin color. What textbooks often omit or inadequately discuss is that racism, inextricably linked to our nation's past, has not gone away with the abolition of slavery. In fact, it has flip-flopped from an overt to a covert problem, pieces and parts rearing into facets of American life. The mentality of white and black seeps into our nation's pores, leaving a legacy of economic disparity and cultural inferiority. Slavery may have ended, but racism certainly has not. Race is the deepest division in American life. It has been the driver of targeted violence against our non-white populations, the conduit through which non-white Americans flowed into urban ghettos, the reason for segregation. It is the festered and hypocritical child of a government that preached liberty and justice for all. It is the silent but ever-present stain on American democracy. In the words of Ken Burns, a filmmaker, the black-white rift stands at the very center of American history. It is the great challenge to which all our deepest aspirations must rise. If we forget that, if we forget the great stain of slavery that stands at the heart of our country, our history, our experiment, we forget who we are, and we make the great rift deeper and wider. Our narrative persists, a reduction of our nation's harrowing past in the persecution of our non-white population under the guise of equality. Years after slavery was abolished, housing discrimination, in which deliberate, racially purposeful policy concocted and executed by all levels of government, resulted in the systematic ghettoization of non-white people. In the 1930s, the Public Works Administration implemented segregated neighborhoods. Through the Federal Housing Administration, segregation was furthered as builders were incentivized with lower interest loans if they would only sell to white people. Housing restricted our non-white population, predominantly Black people, to slums. Schooling in such areas often lacked, and still lack, critical tools and funding to support the students. At the very core of this mistreatment lie racist ideologies. And then there's mass incarceration, the new Jim Crow. In 2014, Black Americans constituted 34% of the total 6.8 million people in correctional facilities. Black men are more than 6 times as likely to be incarcerated as their white counterparts. Hispanic men, more than twice as likely. This is not a coincidence. This is the result of years of rationalization and unfair targeting of our non-white population. This is the affliction to which America has condemned herself. So why does this persist? It all boils down to my textbook theory. There's certainly discomfort when talking about race in America. That's why we will never seem to scratch the surface. It's too messy, too complicated. So, multiple pages are written about a courageous hero, and a couple lines here about how a slave trade happened. But hey, that's the past. Because that narrative is easier for a country to adopt. We should acknowledge the tendency of textbooks to fine-tune and forget our nation's mistakes, leading us to believe that we've been on the right path to equality, or we've already achieved it. White people need to change our country's narrative alongside those persecuted, and take accountability, as too often non-white people are the only ones having these conversations. By looking at our past, it is imperative to recognize silence and ignorance is complicity. Next time, if you hear a racist joke, just shut it down, even if it was just a joke. Or if you're a witness to racial profiling, don't be a bystander. Bottom line, white people need to do more. Unless a dramatic shift ensues, America will continue to let her history as an oppressor to her non-white population define her. By taking accountability and having these conversations, we establish a critical consciousness. I can't proffer a one-and-done solution to ending America's racist plague, but with diligent and genuine efforts, I see hope. Hope that what we do now may change our country's narrative. Thank you.